This happened about 5 years ago when I was working as a night security guard in Midtown Manhattan. At the time, I had one of the strangest jobs I've ever had: overnight security inside St. Patrick's Cathedral. If you've ever been to New York City, you probably know the place. It's that massive Gothic cathedral right across from Rockefeller Center. During the day, it's full of tourists and people coming in to pray, but at night, it's a completely different place. The cathedral closes to the public around 8 p.m. After that, only a few staff members remain for a little while, and eventually everyone leaves. By around 10 p.m., the entire building is empty, except for security. That's where I came in. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. Most of the job was pretty simple. Walk around the cathedral every hour, check the entrances, make sure no one had somehow stayed inside after closing. Honestly, most nights were extremely quiet. Too quiet sometimes. When you're alone inside a huge cathedral at night, every little sound feels bigger than it should. Footsteps echo, wood creaks, air moves through the building, and you hear strange whispers through the stone arches. But during my first few months working there, nothing truly strange happened until one night in November. It was cold outside that night, and the city had already gotten quiet. By midnight, most of the lights across the street in Rockefeller Center were dim, and the streets had fewer people. Inside the cathedral, it was completely silent. The only lights left on were the dim security lights near the aisles and the faint glow around the altar. Around 12:15 a.m., I started my usual patrol. The building was enormous, so it took about 10 minutes to walk the full interior. Everything looked normal. The doors were locked, no movement anywhere. But when I reached the side chapel area, something caught my attention. At first, I thought it was just a shadow, but then I realized something was moving. Someone was sitting in one of the pews. My first reaction was confusion. The cathedral had been closed for hours. There shouldn't have been anyone inside. I slowly walked closer, and that's when I saw him. A man sitting alone in the pew near the front of the chapel. His head was bowed down like he was praying. His hands were folded together. He wasn't moving at all. At first, I assumed it must have been a visitor who somehow stayed inside after closing. Now, that happens sometimes in big buildings. So I approached slowly and said, "Sir, the cathedral is closed." No response. He didn't even lift his head. I stepped closer. "Sir?" Still nothing. He just stayed there in the exact same position. For a moment, I wondered if he was asleep. But something about the way he sat there made the situation feel wrong. Too still, too quiet. Then suddenly, very slowly, he lifted his head. But he didn't turn toward me. Instead, he looked straight ahead toward the altar, and in a very calm voice, he said something that made my stomach tighten. He said, "I come here every night." I immediately responded, "Well, the building closes at 8. You can't stay here after hours." That's when he slowly turned his head toward me, and I noticed something strange. I hadn't heard the doors open, and I hadn't seen anyone come in, and there was no way someone could have gotten past the security system without me knowing. Yet somehow, this man was already inside, and then he said something even stranger. He looked directly at me and said, "You're new here." For a moment, I just stood there staring at him. The way he said it made my skin crawl. "You're new here." It wasn't a question. It sounded like a statement, like he already knew. I tried to stay professional. Working security in New York means you deal with strange people all the time. So I figured maybe he was just someone who had slipped inside earlier and decided to stay. Still, something about the situation felt wrong. I said, "Sir, the cathedral is closed. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The man didn't move. He kept looking toward the altar again. Then he calmly said, "I've been coming here for a long time." His voice echoed softly through the chapel. The entire cathedral felt strangely quiet. I waited a few seconds for him to stand up, but he didn't, so I walked a little closer. "Sir, you can't stay here tonight." That's when he finally stood up, slowly, very slowly. And as he stood, I noticed something odd. His clothes looked old, not dirty exactly, just old-fashioned. A dark coat, dark trousers, the kind of clothing you'd expect to see in photographs from decades ago. But before I could say anything else, he began walking down the aisle toward the exit. He passed right by me without saying another word. I followed him a few steps, expecting to hear the cathedral doors open. But I didn't hear anything. No door, no footsteps outside, just silence. That made me uneasy, because the main entrance doors are huge wooden doors. You can always hear them open, even from across the room, but I hadn't heard them at all. So I walked quickly toward the entrance area. The doors were still closed, locked, exactly the way they had been all night. I stood there staring at them for a few seconds, then I checked the handles. Still locked. That's when a chill ran through me. Because if the doors were still locked, how had that man left? Or more importantly, how had he gotten inside? I immediately went to the small security office in the back of the building. Inside the office, we had several monitors connected to the cathedral's cameras. There were cameras covering the entrances, hallways, and the main nave. I scrolled back through the footage from earlier that night. At first, everything looked normal. Visitors leaving, staff locking up, the final doors closing around 8:05 p.m. After that, nothing. No one entering, no doors opening, no movement anywhere. But when I checked the camera facing the chapel, I felt my stomach tighten. The camera showed the pew where I had seen the man sitting. And right there on the footage, he was already there, sitting in the pew, perfectly still, at 10:03 p.m. That was only 3 minutes after my shift started. But I hadn't seen anyone inside when I did my first patrol, which meant something impossible. According to the cameras, the man had appeared in the cathedral after it was locked, and he had been sitting there silently for over 2 hours before I noticed him. I kept replaying the footage again and again, but the strangest part was this. There was no moment where he walked into the pew. He was simply already sitting there, as if he had appeared out of nowhere. At first, I told myself the cameras must have glitched. Maybe the footage had skipped, but deep down I knew that wasn't true, because the rest of the footage was completely normal. And then I noticed something else. At 12:19 a.m., the moment I approached him in the chapel, the camera briefly caught his face, just for a second. And when I paused the frame and zoomed in, my heart started beating faster, because his face looked extremely pale, almost gray, and his eyes, they looked completely dark. No reflection, no light in them at all. That was the moment I started thinking something was seriously wrong. But the strangest part of that night didn't happen until the next evening, because when I returned for my next shift, the man was already there again, sitting in the same pew, in the exact same position, praying. The next night, when I walked into the cathedral for my shift, the first thing I did was check the chapel. And there he was again, sitting in the exact same pew, head bowed, hands folded, praying. The moment I saw him, a chill ran through me, because this time I knew something wasn't normal. The cathedral had been locked for hours before I arrived. There was no way anyone could have entered without security knowing. Yet somehow, he was already inside. For a moment, I just stood there at the back of the chapel watching him. He didn't move, didn't look up, just sat there silently. The entire cathedral felt unnaturally quiet. Finally, I walked toward him again. My footsteps echoed across the stone floor. When I got closer, I said carefully, "Sir, the cathedral is closed again tonight." He slowly lifted his head, or just like the night before. And again, he didn't look surprised to see me. Instead, he looked almost calm, like he had been expecting me. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. Some prayers must be finished. I didn't even know how to respond to that. So instead I said, "You can't stay here after hours. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." But this time he didn't stand up right away. Instead, he looked toward the altar again. For several seconds, he just stared forward. Then he spoke quietly. I wasn't finished. There was something unsettling about the way he said it, like the prayer he was talking about had been going on for a very long time. Finally, he stood up, and again he walked past me toward the front of the cathedral, but this time I followed him. Because I wanted to see exactly how he was leaving the building. He walked toward the main doors, the massive wooden doors that led outside to Fifth Avenue. But when he reached them, he didn't open them. He didn't even touch them. Instead, he stopped about 2 steps away, then slowly turned toward me. For the first time, he looked directly into my eyes. And that was when I saw his face clearly. It looked wrong. Not injured, not sick, just lifeless. His skin was pale, his eyes dark, and the expression on his face looked empty. Then he said something quietly. "I was killed here." For a moment I thought I had misheard him, but before I could say anything, he continued. "Many years ago." His voice echoed slightly through the massive cathedral. "Woody, I came here to pray, and I never left." A cold feeling spread through my chest. I didn't know what to say. But then he looked toward the altar one more time and said something that made the entire situation even more disturbing. "My prayer is not finished yet." And then something happened that I still can't fully explain. The lights above the altar flickered once, just for a second, and when I looked back toward him, he was gone, completely gone. The space where he had been standing was empty. No footsteps, no door opening, nothing. Just silence. I stood there frozen for several seconds, trying to understand what had just happened. Eventually, I checked the security cameras again, and what I saw made the situation even stranger. The footage showed me standing near the entrance,
and locked,
looking around. But the man was never there. Not walking, not standing, not leaving. According to the cameras, I had been standing there alone the entire time. The next morning, I told one of the older cathedral staff members about what had happened. At first, he didn't say anything, but then he told me something strange. Back in the 1930s, a man had been found dead inside the cathedral, a visitor who had come late at night to pray. The story was that he had collapsed suddenly in the chapel before anyone noticed. By the time they found him, he had already died. And according to the old staff member, the man had been praying for someone he had lost every night for weeks until the night he died. After hearing that, I never saw the praying man again. But sometimes when I think about those nights inside the cathedral, I remember something that still bothers me. Because when I checked the cameras that final night, there was one frame where something appeared, just for a moment. At the far end of the chapel, someone sitting in the pew again, head bowed, praying, like he had never left.